You see it, even if you don't watch the news. Anger and divisions. The left is mad at the right. The right is mad at the left. The people in the middle think, let's give the right a chance. And then when things don't get better, let's give the left a chance. And that's why the pendulum swings many times. But things never get better. You have some people that blame minorities for their problems. They blame immigrants. You have some minorities that blame white people for all their problems. I'm here to tell you, the reason your life isn't where you want it to be, the reason you can't afford a home, the reason you can't afford a car to have a family, to procreate, it's not because of a regular person. Redirect that anger at the perpetrator who is responsible for your predicament. The lobbyists who work for these companies like Walmart and McDonald's, they purposely write legislation, be angry at them, both parties, big pharmaceutical companies. And then both parties in the Congress and the Senate, they sell us out. They're bought and paid for. The big corporations, and especially the international bankers, who they print money out of thin air, and I'll get into this. You have to pay interest on that. Our entire system cannot be debt-free because the government, every time it prints money, it issues treasury bonds, and the Federal Reserve gets interest on that. We spend all of our lives working a 9-to-5 trying to pay the banks for our car, our home, and these bankers who provide nothing tangible to society, they make money off of it, and we're slaves to the banking system. Stop blaming the left, stop blaming the right, stop blaming gay people, stop blaming white people. Blame the real perpetrators, that's all I'm saying. We often hear, back in the day, we weren't so divided. Back in the 90s, you had people were dancing and hugging and kissing, kumbaya, and I can't speak on that. I was born in 1993. However, when I was in high school, I went to high school from 2009 to 2012. We didn't talk about racism. We didn't talk about people's sexuality. You had people who were gay, but they never said much about it. We kind of just knew they were gay, and we talked about sports. We talked about getting girls. We talked about movies, music, YouTube videos. We didn't talk about any of that stuff. Nobody really thought about their identity. Nobody really thought about politics. You had a few kids that were in honors classes who thought about politics, but your average high school kid back then, they didn't care about politics. And my parents, who went to high school in the 70s and 80s, they said nobody there cared about politics. They were busy living their lives. That's because people could actually afford to do things. Whether you like it, whether you don't, this all goes back to economics. The purchasing power of the currency, of the dollar in your pocket, gets substantially less than it used to. If people were making babies, buying houses, going on vacation, going to Chuck E. Cheese, where I used to go all the time as a kid, going to Disneyland, hanging out with their grandkids, getting a new car, they wouldn't be worried about the president. They wouldn't be worried about this or that. They would be purchasing goods and services. And if you can't afford basic necessities, shelter, food, water, transportation, gasoline, the quality of your life is going to be significantly lower. All of this is due to the purchasing power of the currency in your wallet. Let's begin with a little history lesson. This all is conducive together. Right here, this talks about a United States note, and I'll show you what one looks like. A United States note, also known as a legal tender note, is a type of paper that was issued from 1862 to 1971 in the United States. It was backed by and redeemable for physical silver or gold. U.S. notes were currency for 109 years. This is current, but currency is the correct word. Longer than any form of U.S. paper money other than the currently issued Federal Reserve note. Little short history lesson. I'm going to promise you it's not going to be long, and then I will show you what this looks like. During the Civil War, when the South seceded, a couple southern states didn't, Kentucky didn't secede, the United States needed money to pay for the war. Abraham Lincoln went to international bankers from London. They were going to charge him 36% interest. Instead of dealing with that, he did something that required common sense, something neither party has today. They're both a bunch of buffoons. He decided, why not just have the U.S. Treasury print these notes? And alas, the United States note was created. And here is one right here. You can see today. One thing you notice is at the top of it right here, it says United States note. Instead of a green seal, which now is the Federal Reserve seal of approval, it's red. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. But here's what's really interesting at the bottom of this thing. It says, will pay to the bearer on demand. It's the people's money. It's not printed by the bankers. It's not based on debt. The U.S. Treasury prints it. The people work and they have that money. That's sound currency, and it is redeemable. You can get $5 worth of silver. You can't print more money than you have silver available. So therefore, it is impossible to have inflation. And I'll show you some differences on a US dollar now. If you have one in your wallet, pull this out. You see the US dollar now. And I never understood why they used a picture of Granny George Washington. He was a 6'2" war hero. They could have made him look like a bad A, but instead they used a granny looking picture. But it's neither here nor there. It says Federal Reserve note. It is printed by the Federal Reserve. You don't see anything where it says it's redeemable. That's because there's nothing backing it up other than our belief in it. And it says $1 at the bottom. Long story short, because this is important, your dollar can no longer purchase as much as it used to. You put your money in a bank. Say you put $1. The bank, then, I'll say $100. I'll make it a little bit easier. The bank is not required to keep all that money. They can loan 50 of those dollars to Ted, who wants to buy a car, for example. Ted then has to pay back interest. On the top of that interest, they can print more and more money. That's a debt-based system. The reason we can't pay down the debt, it is due to spending Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and military spending, and interest on the debt. I don't understand why we're paying interest on the debt, over $700 billion. But if you simply just started printing U.S. notes, you could get rid of that. Jerome Powell has the ability, he's not elected, he's appointed by the president, but he's not elected, and the Federal Reserve is privately owned by the bankers. They're the ones who get to control the money supply, how much money is printed. They get to set interest rates, how much you have to pay by borrowing. Why don't we just get rid of them, get rid of the debt system, and just start printing money from the Treasury? That's how you'd pay down the debt. And you can buy some of this currency online. I'm going to buy some of it in a few weeks from now. And it's still used as legal tender. You can go to a gas station and exchange it for gasoline or beer or whatever your prerogative is. A little bit of history, because this is important. In 1913, that's when the Federal Reserve was established. Since that time, the United States doesn't print its own currency anymore. It's printed by private bankers. And the reason you got to work your 9 to 5 to pay off your house, to pay off your car, to pay for your student loans, and your dollar goes less further than it used to is because of these bankers. The system is created on debt, and you've got to work to pay back interest on that debt. Each dollar printed has debt attached to it. It's like a game of Monopoly. Debt, 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 debt. And it's not designed to be paid off. And because they print so much money and nothing backs it up, you got to work more hours and your dollar goes less further than it used to. In 1971, Nixon took the United States off the gold standard. In 1940, that was when you had the Bretton Woods system, and each dollar is backed by gold. But then in 1971, Nixon took us off the gold standard. And ever since that time, the currency has devalued. And because the currency in your pocket doesn't go as further as it used to, you can't purchase a home, you can't have kids, you can't purchase basic necessities. And that's the economic part of it. And I'll delve a little bit deeper, I'll dissect this more near the conclusion of this video. Another question. We hear that we are in the end times. That's a common trope that is used by people. If that's your way of thinking, that's your way of thinking. I would have to disagree. As a student of history, a large reason is the United States, like any other empire, the British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Abbasid Empire, Mongol Empire. It's the natural order of things. Empires rise, they expand, they innovate, they have a slow, precipitous decline, and then something else takes over. Another power takes over when that power vacuum comes. That would be my argument. I'm sure when Rome fell and Constantinople fell, the Byzantine Empire fell and was taken over by the Ottomans, I'm sure at that time people thought Jesus was coming back. And then you had the Dark Ages in Europe. A lot of disease, a lot of war, a lot of famines. I'm sure people back then thought the same thing, to a certain degree. This is simply the decline of the United States empire. What makes the United States an empire? I'm going to read a little bit of what I wrote here. The term empire can be complex and context dependent, and its application to the United States is a subject of debate among historians, political scientists, and scholars. Traditionally, an empire is defined as a large political unit, often a state that exerts control over territories and peoples beyond its own borders, typically through conquest, colonization, or domination. Classical examples include the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. Here are a few reasons I would define the United States as an empire. These are similarities to the other empires. Number one is military presence. The United States maintains a significant global military presence with hundreds of bases worldwide, which can be seen as a form of exerting influence and control over these regions. Interesting thing I looked up right before I made this video. It talks about defense spending. Defense spending by the United States accounted for nearly 40% of military expenditures by countries around the world in 2023. According to recently released figures from the Stockholm International Peace Resolution, U.S. defense spending increased by $55 billion from 2022 to 2023, in part due to additional military aid sent to support Ukraine. The United States spends more on defense than the next 9 countries combined. And it'll show you right here, China is the second largest. So this is how much the United States spends, $916 billion. And then China spends $883. Well, the next countries combined spend $883 billion. The United States spends a lot. And instead of fixing the infrastructure or giving money to the inner cities, they send it to other countries. We work for our money, they tax our money, and then they give that money to other countries. While our infrastructure is crumbling, the inner cities are going down, you have vacant factories. These are real things if you are not dumb and you actually know how things work. A big thing would be 750, there are roughly 750 U.S. foreign military bases around the world. They are spread across 80 nations. The second largest is the UK with only 145. Russia, who we keep hearing about, is a threat to the world. They only have 3. Not a fan of Russia, but think about it. We have 750. Russia has 3. 750. That's more than Rome had military presence around the world. That's larger than the Mongol Empire, who, if you look at territory, is the largest empire in history. The United States is an empire. Economic influence. The U.S. has a dominant role in global economics and international institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which can be used to influence the policies of other nations. I won't get all into the weeds here. I'll just make it simple. The United States, just like the British did, control the seas through their navy. They have the strongest navy in the world. They make shipping, where most of our goods come from and raw materials come from the Panama Canal into the ports of Los Angeles and San Francisco. They control the waterways of the world, making it safe and stable. That's why Rome had flourishing trade when they were a world power. They made it stable with their navy. They controlled the Mediterranean. If anybody tried to use piracy or come against them, they would have simply been destroyed. Cultural influence. American culture, through media, technology, and consumer products, has a pervasive global reach, impacting lifestyles and cultural norms around the world. And that's evident. You talk to people even in Africa, Asia, they know who LeBron James is. They know who Taylor Swift is. They know President Trump is our president. They know New York City, most of them. They know Los Angeles because of movies. And a lot of them, it's funny, they get over here. I live in Tennessee, in a small town. They come over here and they're surprised that the majority of the United States is just empty land, or it's rural. The big metropolitan cities are not even a large part of the country for most of us. And it's funny when they get over here and they can't believe just how much smaller, because they watch movies, they see the Kardashians, or they see the luxury Beverly Hills. So I don't watch reality TV. It rots my brain, and I don't really have much of a brain to rot in the first place. I'm not that intelligent. I'm a brain donor. But I digress. They come over here and they think that's how things are. Historical expansion. The U.S. has a history of territorial expansion, such as the annexation of Hawaii, the acquisition of territories following the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and the influence over countries in Latin America through doctrines and policies like the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt-Colorley. Long story short, the United States was a blatant empire at one time. It used to be normal, especially in the early 1900s, that these countries would want to have the largest empires. They would expand their navies, they would expand their presence around the world and other parts of the globe. When the United States won the Spanish-American War, they directly had control and influence over those territories. But over time, the United States never had quote-unquote direct colonies. But they have a military presence there, and they have bases there, U.S. troop presence there. Which, although the U.S.-Filipino War was tragic, it was a war of imperialism. But every empire, the Ottoman Empire, had a war of imperialism as well. Every empire tends to go down this trajectory. It did allow the United States to be able to have military bases in the Pacific Ocean, and they're able to use that to defeat the Japanese in World War II and take over some of the islands when they were doing the island hopping. It did come into advantage, but the point is they didn't have a direct colony, but they did have military presence and influence in that area. That's why I would argue that although the United States never had traditional colonies, like the British did, like the Ottomans did, it still had massive control over those territories, just like any other empire. And then you have these empires, and it talks about the rise and fall. The first thing is the decline of the currency, which I talked about. I'll be brief on this. Because of World War I, the enormous financial burden of the war forced Britain to abandon the gold standard in 1914. The war effort required massive borrowing and money printing, which led to inflation and devaluation of the pound. After the war, attempts to return to the gold standard at pre-war parity were disastrous. Then you had the Great Depression, and in 1931, Britain permanently abandoned the gold standard. The pound was significantly devalued, leading to international trade issues. And that's really when the British Empire declined. You think things are bad, they're even worse in Great Britain right now. As bad as they are here. I have a friend over there, and he tells me all the time how bad things are over there. The Roman Empire. Debasement and hyperinflation. Roman emperors repeatedly reduced the silver content in coins. Sound familiar, what I told you about earlier? Again, history repeats itself. It rhymes and mirrors, just like Mark Twain said. Roman emperors repeatedly reduced the silver content in coins to fund military campaigns and administrative expenses. The practice, known as debasement, led to severe inflation. Hyperinflation eroded savings and caused prices to soar, disrupting everyday economic activities. Trade became more difficult as the value of currency fluctuated wildly. As confidence in Roman coinage waned, people increasingly resorted to barter or used foreign coins. This undermined the central government's economic control and reduced tax revenues. The inability to pay soldiers adequately weakened the Roman Empire. Additionally, the financial strain contributed to political instability, with frequent changes in leadership and civil wars further destabilizing the empire. Again, just like Great Britain, just like the United States, devaluation of the currency. Mongol Empire. The Yuan dynasty in China, and they really built China, introduced paper money. The Mongol rulers, particularly under Kublai Khan, introduced paper money to facilitate trade and tax collection. Initially, the system worked well, like it always does. You can print a bunch of money for a while, people can live high off the hog like we did in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, but eventually, once you print too much money, somebody is going to get rude, just like the millennial generation did. Over time, excessive issuance of paper money unbacked by sufficient reserves led to severe devaluation and inflation. Inflation caused prices to rise dramatically, disrupting trade and commerce. Merchants and traders lost confidence in the currency, leading to economic stagnation. Social and political instability. It all comes together. When your currency is devalued, you then have political instability. You then have social instability. I don't just make these things up to make these things up. Economic hardship fueled social unrest and revolts, such as the Red Turban Rebellion. The loss of public trust in the government's ability to manage the economy contributed to the weakening of central authority and the eventual fall of the Yuan dynasty. Last but not least, well, it's actually not the last one, I lied, Ottoman Empire. Debasement of the ache. The Ottoman Empire faced recurring financial difficulties and responded by debasing its currency, the ache. This involved reducing the silver content in coins, leading to devaluation, inflation, and economic decline. The devaluation caused inflation, eroding the purchasing power of the population, leading to widespread economic hardship. Prices for basic goods increased, making everyday life more difficult for ordinary people. Social unrest and revolts, it all happens together. It's a domino effect. It's a powder keg effect. Economic difficulties contributed to social unrest, with various uprisings and revolts challenging Ottoman authority. Military and administrative challenges. The government struggled to pay its officials and military personnel adequately. This weakened the empire's administrative efficiency and military strength, making it more vulnerable to internal and external threats. The Spanish Empire. I know I'm like a broken record, but I'm trying to hammer this in to prove my point. And this is the last one. 16th and 17th centuries. Influx of American silver. The discovery of vast silver deposits in the Americas led to a massive influx of silver into Spain. Initially, this seemed like a boom, enriching the Spanish crown and funding its ambitions in Europe. Price revolution and inflation. The sudden increase in silver supply led to widespread inflation, known as the price revolution. The value of money decreased, causing prices to rise across Europe. Economic imbalance. Inflation reduced the competitiveness of Spanish goods, harming domestic industries. Spain became heavily reliant on imports. Sound familiar? What are we doing right now? We're relying on China and Laos and Vietnam to import all of our stuff. Further exasperating economic problems. Printed a bunch of money, relying on other countries to produce things, and then we wonder why things are more expensive. Debt and financial crises. The Spanish crown borrowed extensively to finance wars and maintain its empire. Repeated default on debt payment. At one time, the Spanish actually had the most silver reserves in the world, but they defaulted on that. Because if nothing backs your currency, if there's no production behind it, you're just printing a bunch of money and adding it to the money supply and not producing anything, kind of like what we're doing now, it causes the devaluation of your currency. Now, last but not least, definitely not least, I'll talk a little bit about us domestically. The US dollar has lost over 96% of its value since 1913, when the Federal Reserve took over the dollar. The Fed devalues the dollar by printing more dollars without creating any value. I talked about that earlier. Home prices. The average price of a home in 1950 was $7,350. $1 in 1950 is equivalent to purchasing power to about $10.89 in 2019. In 1980, it was $47,000. 1990, $79,100. 2000, $119,600. In 2024, $42,800. The median price of a home has went up 240.92% since the year 2000. College education price. In the 1989-90 academic year, tuition at the average public four-year institution was $1,780. In 2000 to 2001, it was $5,153. In 2024, it was $26,027 per year, or $1,100 over 4 years. Over $100,000 for your college education. The median price of a college education has went up about 404.57% since the year 2000. Unless you're going to get an actual useful degree where you're going to provide value to society, better not go to college. Not saying I like it. There's things that we could do to make it better. But if you're going to get a women's studies degree or a puppetry degree, it's probably not a good idea to go to college. But if you get an engineering degree or a teaching degree like my sister did, you'll be able to pay that back because you're actually providing value to society and you can pay that money back. The last time the government had a surplus was 2000. They had a 5,674 budget surplus. Whatever you think of Billy Boy Clinton, him and Newt Gingrich came together. If you're a Republican, you can give Newt Gingrich credit. If you're a Democrat, you can give Bill Clinton credit. They came together in 2000 and they had a 5,674 budget surplus. And that's the last time the government balanced the budget. Over 25 years ago. During Donald Trump's whole presidency, the U.S. national debt increased by $8.18 trillion, a percentage of 40.43%. This is less than Barack Obama, 69.98%, and George W. Bush, 105.8%. However, Donald Trump was in office for only 4 years, compared to 8 for both Barack Obama and George W. Bush. It's my opinion that whatever you think about Bill Clinton, he did a lot of bad things, and I disagree with his NAFTA, GATT, and some of the policies he signed. But when he got out of office, things were pretty damn good. Home ownership was high. The United States didn't get involved in any wars. They had a surplus. The national debt was not as high. And then Bush gets in there, W. Bush, and he messes everything up. And I say this as someone who's in the middle. I like Ronald Reagan. I like JFK. I'm in the middle. I like Richard Nixon. I think Bill Clinton did a good job as a president. I don't think he's a good guy. But the point I'm trying to convey is Bush came in there and increased the national debt by 105.8%. And he destabilized all these other countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, so on and so forth. Worst president in United States history besides Woodrow Wilson, in my humble opinion. He's certainly the worst modern president we've had. Debt to GDP ratio. This ratio gives us an idea of how much debt a country has in comparison to the size of economy. It helps us understand if a country can comfortably manage its debt payments. For example, if a country has a debt to GDP ratio of 80%, it means that the government's debt is 80% of the country's total economic output for that year. Well, new data published says that the debt to GDP ratio for the United States now, let me check what it is in 2025. The debt to GDP ratio at the close of fiscal year 2024 was 98%. So it's going down a little bit. And a lot of that is due to the Rona. It was 120.03%. So it is going down a little bit, but it's still 98%, which means for every dollar being produced, only 2% of it is production. 98% of it is debt-based. Back to the main discussion at hand. New data published Thursday by TransUnion shows that the average debt per borrower hit 6,218 at the end of the first quarter, an 8.5% increase from 1 year ago. Consumers owe a collective $1.02 trillion in credit card debt, an all-time high. Gotta pay those bankers, baby. And when those people call me, I don't even mess with them. Long story short, I was using a bank and I went over and I was going to promise to pay them. But then they moved my account towards collections. I don't owe collections anything. I didn't sign a legally binding contract with collections. I told the lady on there, I am not paying your ass. You can keep calling me, you can keep harassing me. I'm not paying your damn ass. You're wasting your time. I was going to pay the bank. And I asked her, what are you going to do if I don't pay you? And she said, we're going to send you letters. I said, go ahead, baby. Send me those letters. Back to the main event. The average cost of a new car in 2022 was reported to be about $48,000, and for a used car, $35,000. Most car owners will provide an initial down payment of 10 to 20% of the car's cost, after which they then have a monthly loan payment. Gotta pay those bankers, baby. Utilities, cell phones, $1,884 a year. That's $157 per month. Electricity, $1,644 per year. $137 per month. Cable and internet, $1,416 per year. $118 per month. Internet only, $9,000 per year. $75 per month. Gas, $756 per year. $63 per month. Now I calculated that if you're driving 20 minutes or less to work. It really depends on your route to work. Streaming services, $648 per year, $54 a month. Streaming is just cable with extra steps. Water, $540 per year, $45 per month. And I just got a letter from my local water company who reiterated to me that the price of water is going to go up. It is what it is. The average monthly expenses for American households total $6,081, according to the most recent Consumer Expenditure Survey from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's $72,972 per year. The national average income was $59,384. So, to pay for all that stuff, just the necessities. Cell phones are a necessity now if you're out and about. Electricity, internet now is pretty much a necessity. Gas, water. You're still spending substantially more than the average person earns. And that's because your currency doesn't go as far as it used to. I'm just telling you what it is. Next time you get mad at a trans person or a white person, I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you what it is. Don't shoot the messenger. I wrote a little antidote at the bottom, and then I will conclude. A penny found is better than a penny earned because you have to pay taxes on the penny that you earned. Another thing, you pay taxes on your wages. You pay sales tax to spend your own money. Then you pay income tax on your money that has already been taxed. Property tax, car tax, and when you die, your children will pay the death tax on money which has already been taxed. We revolted when the British wanted to have the Stamp Act, the Tea Act. For a small percentage, they at least defended us from the French and during the French and Indian War. What is our own government doing? with all that money they're taking out of us. You're taking 30% of our income, and you're still in debt. The American empire is declining, ladies and gentlemen, and whatever you identify as. And that's about all I got. I should say there's a silver lining. I don't hear either party offering solutions to the problem. I don't hear either party talking about this right here, United States note. When you keep printing dollars and you let the Fed control interest rates and the supply of money, all you got to do is print some of these. Don't overdo it to inflate them, but print about a couple thousand of these things. And then start circulating through the economy. But no party is going to do that. No party has a real plan to pay off the debt. So here we are, folks. Welcome to America.